Yeah. Yeah, and there are a lot of fear tactics used to keep our heads down in this society, you know?
Okay. So, I guess one criticism that people have been saying about Occupy Wall Street in general is that, you know, it's one thing, it's not necessarily correct to target the people who are working at these banks. You know, if you want to make change, why don't you just go to Washington and talk to the policymakers who allow these banks to do so well? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I definitely have something to say about that, because that has bothered me a lot.
Okay.
Because I think that sets up this binary of the government and of businesses and corporations.
Which doesn't exist anymore.
Right, that sets up this binary.
Let's talk about the bailout.
It's either the government's fault or it's business's fault, and it's like one or the other. But see, the issue is I don't have an issue with the government. I don't have an issue with corporations. I have an issue with corporations controlling the government and influencing the government through money, basically.
And getting paid by the government. I mean,
right?
we are seeing a lot of people coming out of the corporate sector into really high-level appointed positions in Washington, D.C. We saw at the end of Bush's term, like, literally they just sort of said, how much money can we take from the government before our guy's out of office? And there was a over $700 billion bailout that was basically forced through Congress, despite the fact that the vast majority of Americans who were aware of it spoke out against this bailout. It went straight into the pockets of the people who created the financial crisis, and a lot of it translated into raises for these already elite, already really well-off people. A lot of it translated into just sort of promoting this disparity rather than investing it in reunionizing, rather than investing it in putting money back in the pockets of the people who can't afford to buy food, who can't afford to keep their houses because they were tricked into these subprime loans that then the bank uses to steal the houses that their families have owned for sometimes decades and decades. You know, I've seen footage of people having the police break down the door of the house that their grandmother was raised in and have it taken from them, you know, and that to me isn't right.
Something else I want to say is that okay, so a lot of people like to say, you know, it's the government who allowed these people who couldn't pay for these houses buy these houses, right? But what actually happened is that, you know, over the 90s and the 2000s, money from corporate money influence, you know, was given to lawmakers, and these same lawmakers who accepted money from like banks then deregulated, and that caused, you know, these people to buy these homes, right? So it's not just like oh, the government deregulated and so it's the government's fault. Okay. It starts before that.
Well, and the other thing is that the idea of corporate power, like, that's not just some sort of, you know, like ghost lurking in the background of politics that we leftists imagine. Like, that just means that people who have a lot of money have a lot of power to determine what happens in politics. And so you can go tell your politicians, hey, we're really dissatisfied. We want you to make things better. But really, the root of the problem is that there's a small sliver of society that has a lot of power to determine what goes on in politics, regardless, really, of who individually is in power. And so until you can change that, we don't really think you can change what goes on politically.
Okay. Girl, I'm just gonna
And I mean, a very specific example of that I always like to bring up is the fact that in the last election cycle, Goldman Sachs donated $30,000 to both, like officially $30,000 to both the Democrats and the Republicans. You know, like I personally don't have $30,000 to give to either of these parties. You know, to
and that was the maximum they could donate officially, and unofficially they're buying them dinner, they're taking them to the private yachts. Like the Supreme Court is attending private parties at, you know, the Koch brothers mansion. Like,
and let's also talk about,
it's incredibly problematic.
Let's talk about
you know, like when
that Stu brought up,
when households
where the people we see as being most authoritative on these issues are those who have come out of industry. Right, so people who go on to be regulators, people who go on to, you know, staff the Treasury, those are people who come out of finance and industry. We see those as the people who are qualified to determine what happens terms of state activity.
So
Yeah.
to give almost a point of comparison that we haven't talked about yet, but in science, when you want to like do anything that involves humans, whether human subjects, studying a human population somehow, you have to go to something called an IRB. You go to like an institutional review board, and these boards are made up of like there's scientists there, and they're administrators of the college, but there are also community members, like clergy. There's a true spectrum, like a true thin slice of the community, and those are the board, like those are the groups of people that are empowered and that like have been decided to have the ability to really weigh issues. The idea that only people in business can like make decisions about business issues is incredible. And like I'm not one to for instance say that like that scientists need to have their data going and rummaged by people who aren't qualified. But I think that when we're talking about which kind of acts are penalized and rewarded in our society, we're not talking about something that only business people are qualified to speak on.
I mean, economics is a political issue. Right?
Well, can I say something?
Yeah.
Because I think one thing that's really important to notice is that our government theoretically has checks and balances to keep the political system in check, which are falling apart and aren't really working. But the economic system doesn't even have those theoretical checks and balances to stop corruption, to create a means of, the people who are being, subjugated to this system to actually have a say in making it more fair for them. I mean, the last sort of check and balance for these corporations was unions, and unions are being destroyed across the country. I mean, in many ways, I think this movement, we saw this coming, we definitely saw it coming when Governor Walker did what he did in Wisconsin, and all of the teachers and all of those people stood up and said, you can't take away our ability to have a say in how we are economically governed by the companies we work for, because you are kind of subject to the people you work for. And if there's no system of maintaining some sort of fairness there, then there's no, in these corporations who are prioritizing profits and not people, then there's no vested interest for them in making sure that their practices are humane, are fair, or anything. And if we allow these corporations to continue go unregulated, to continue to exist in a way that has no system of checks and balance that is democratically based and that gives the people who are, the vast majority of our society and make like the smallest little fraction of our capital any say, we're not really a true democracy. And it is, it's definitely plutocracy, and it's borderline collective fascism. I'm not gonna lie,
Yeah, we've done a few things over the past few decades that really speak to how empowered corporations are. So one is that we repealed anti-usury laws. Right? Usury is charging extortionate interest rates. Now this is one of the oldest laws of political society, that you can't charge extortionate interest rates. But we come along and say, well, people should be able to sign up for whichever interest rates they choose. What this means is that through complicated financial and bureaucratic systems, people end up often unwittingly signing on to loans that land them in highly compromising positions. Another thing is that a lot of companies can shirk their obligations to their employees through bankruptcy. They declare bankruptcy, and then they're
What happened in Philadelphia with the orchestra there.
Right, and then they're no longer responsible for everything that they owed their employees. Okay, and then the last thing is union busting. And this has really increased over the past at least 2 decades.
Because really the last thing, it's really the last institution protecting workers.
Right, that's the way that labor responds to accumulated capital or to corporate power. And what we've done is really disempowered collective bargaining, right? Mm-hmm. All of the laws that really impair
those are the granddaddy hustling, greedy people in our capitalist
weird
system.
Attitude towards unions,
workers.
where I think that unions are going to destroy everything. That if we strip the workers of their power, then somehow everying will be better for people who work.
Yeah.
Which is such a perplexing attitude.
Union gave us the weekend, the 8-hour workday, minimum wage. Corporations, okay, businesses want to get rid of that because then it allows them to pay workers less, to make workers work more for less, and to be able to have like more than 5 days a week. Now that's not necessarily going to happen, but it's like
it's a very simple David versus Goliath image.
It's like very simple. Basically wanting to pay workers less.
What's up, Renee?
Like in other countries.
So,
Yeah.